what we said is I want you to imagine throughout this series 2027. I want you to fast forward in your head as much as you can for the next 5 years. And when you think about 5 years, one of the most important things for you is going to be your goals and where you end up. And we talked about who you're going to become. And most of us have all of those things in mind. But the other part of you that's so interesting is the ways that you move into the next 5 years, the direction that you go in the next 5 years, and the ways that you are shaped isn't going to just be shaped by you. It's going to be shaped by the people who are around you. Now, let me just pause real quick. Can I just pause real quick? When we start talking about relationships, friendships in particular, there's a lot of us in the room, including me, that would immediately go, I don't need to hear that or talk about that because I'm an adult, right? So let me just tell you right off the bat. If there's any part of you that goes, this feels like a youth group talk already, okay, great. But can we just also come around that you know adults who are really bad at this? And most of us are really bad at this too. That's just true. When it comes to our friendships and our relationships, one of the things that I want to encourage you on to think about is most of us struggle with friendships, not that we don't have them, and not that you don't have a network of people, and not that you don't have people in your life, and not that you don't even have people that you would go to a dinner party or hang out with. The deeper part of this is how we do our friendships and what does that look like. And I think the even deeper problem isn't just how we do it, it's the thing that it's most connected to in you and the thing that it's most connected to in me. So let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. I love doing this. We do this a lot. How many of you in the room are pretty extroverted? Like it's easy for you. Everybody's your friend. You know what I mean? Like we're extroverts. All right. Now real quick, we'll do this a little bit slower, but my introverts, just go ahead and slowly raise your hand. Everybody introverts that. Good. And then how many of you, we probably maybe like me a little bit, you're kind of on the middle. Anybody in the middle? Like you kind of go back and forth. You're extrovert when you're around people you like, and you turn real introverted quick on people you don't. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or you just kind of recharge by yourself. There's a little bit of that. Now, at the root of this, I think it's so fascinating when it comes to like friendships and relationships and the ways that you think about the world. At the heart of all of that is something that was ingrained in you when you were a child, right? And there's a phrase that I think sums it up so well that we hear at our house all the time with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and that's this. It's like, I can do this by myself, right? I can do it all by myself, right? Now, this is fun when you have kids, right? Especially when you have young kids. Like, I think about this picture when you think about, I can cook all by myself. You know what I mean? Yeah. Daddy, I saw you cut your hair. I can cut my hair all by myself. You know what I mean? I actually did this to myself 2 weeks ago. This is pretty great. Yeah. That was great. Some of you are like, yeah, you did, didn't you? I can go to the bathroom. I can go potty all by myself. You've done this too, right? How many of you had kids that did any of these so far? Anybody? Yeah. Just me. Okay, great. Mommy, I can put on makeup all by myself. This is kind of a fun one. I love that one. That's kind of fun. I get nauseous when I see that picture. I don't know. I can't handle it. Yeah. Now, this is my favorite one, especially those of you who've ever done housework before, like you've redone your house. Like, Daddy, let me know. I can paint all by myself. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Now, here's what's funny. As adults, we look at this and we're like, oh, that's so cute because they're kids. But you know what we can put up here? We can put up a relationship that you have. I can do that all by myself. And then we put that guy's picture up there and everybody would go, oh, no, you shouldn't have dated him. You know what I mean? And anybody who knows you and him would probably go like, nah, you remember that. You know what I mean? And you think about financial stuff, we would never do this, obviously. But if you ever put up like your financial decisions, every once in a while we can put that, then visualize it on the screen. And most of us in the room at times would go, oh, I shouldn't have bought that. You know what I mean? Like, you feel some of that way. Some of you can put a house up there and you're like, oh, we thought, but we should have. And then you're like, no, we probably shouldn't have done that. You think about that financially. There's all sorts of places you think about this. And at the root of all this, from the time that you're a little kid to the time you end up not being on earth anymore, there's a part of you that craves independence to some level. And independence isn't bad. In fact, we train our kids to be independent, right? We do this all the time. I looked at my son the other day. He's like, Daddy, can you help me with something? And I thought about it. I can help you with it, but I want you to learn how to do it. And so I try to coach him through that, right? Because I want him to be independent. Independent isn't bad until independence goes too far. And the feeling of independence that you have and that I have is actually oftentimes an excuse we make to create an isolated version of ourselves so that we can do what we want to do, right? Oftentimes when independence leads to isolation, it actually does something to our hearts and our minds and our lives. And what that ends up doing for us ends up becoming this like independence to isolation, and isolation ends up being one of the greatest fuels for regret. Right? And this is just me. I really believe this to be true. If you were going to rewind in your life back some of your biggest regrets, more times than not, it would follow this pattern. It would follow a deeply rooted thing that you have about independence that ultimately led you to isolation. Let's put that, independence to isolation. Now, this is why this happened. Now, I don't need to explain this to you. You've already explained this probably to a high schooler at some point. Like, you get this part, but I want to go deep into this, right? The reason this is so dangerous is that isolation kind of pulls you off to make you convince yourself sometimes that you have all the information that you need to make the decision on your own. And sometimes you do, but if you're anything like me, I can also convince myself of decisions because of things that I want, right? Now, the problem with this is you can't see in your life what you can't see. Every single person has blind spots, and you're predisposed to some blind spots simply because of the ways that you were raised, the way that you see the world, right? Where you are in life, there are certain blind spots that you just have. And the harder part about this, and this is what we're going to spend the most time on today, is that your emotions and your context can make clarity elusive for your decision making, right? You can be the most well-intentioned, right? You can do all the right things, you can check all the right boxes, but clarity around your decisions can become elusive simply because you're making decisions in isolation. Now, the other thing that I want to tell you too is some of you in the room, especially those of you who are highly extroverted, you're probably really good at this. You're probably really good at having a lot of friends who know you, but don't really know you. And that's different, right? Here's the thing for you, and this is where I kind of want you to like, if there's a part of you that goes, well, I have friends, I do relationships well, I'm not isolated, I've got 3,762 Facebook friends, we're good, like whatever that is, Let me just tell you for a second. When you go to make a difficult or painful decision where you have internal conflict, if you're not asking whatever number of those people are that are in that circle of friends that you have, right? Those might be friends or acquaintances, but you've kept them enough at a distance where they're actually unhelpful for your life, right? Now, not everybody needs to be in that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if you are the king of most of that, what you're going to find yourself experiencing over and over again throughout your life is some version of regret. Now, I want to talk through this. Not everybody experiences regret in the same ways or in the same places. Some of you experience this in relationships. I poked at this a second ago, but you've experienced this in dating relationships. You've experienced this in friendships. Friendship is probably one of the hardest ones, right? You've been in a friendship for a long time that maybe you outgrew, or that they outgrew you and there became tension and you're still friends, but now it turned nasty. Anybody ever had a friendship that just turned bad real quick? Anybody ever experienced one of those? It just turned bad, and there was gossip, and then there was he said and she said. At one point they're talking about your mama, and then you're going to Karate Kid on somebody. Like, it gets real bad real quick, and then it gets messy, and then there's an end to the relationship. One of the most healthy things that you can do is go, I don't want to experience that kind of regret in my relationship, so I'm willing to make hard decisions about the people who are in my inner circle before it becomes messy, right? I love talking about this. This is always fun for me, but some of you have been in a dating relationship before where somebody that cared about you looked at you and said, I don't think you should be in that. I don't know that they're right for you. And you know this, you're just kind of blinded by love or whatever it is that you felt or that you call that in that moment, right? And the hard part is, especially if you have like middle schoolers or high schoolers or whatever, puppy love is real to puppies, right? Like whatever it is that you felt, it's real to you and it matters and all sorts of emotions around that, but come on. And what you did is when everybody around you started saying, I don't know if you should do that, I don't know if you should do that, what you did is you just muted them. And you did it anyway, right? And then you know that you fast forward 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 5 years, a marriage that ended, like whatever that was, and you get to the other side of it and you go, oh, way back there. Somebody was saying, I don't know if this is the right thing for you. This happens in friendships. This happens in all sorts of relationships you have. We talked about this earlier, finances. This is another one that most of us experience at some point in life. Like when you think about your financial decisions, a lot of times regret happens because finances are viewed as so private that you don't want to share it with anybody. You don't share it with everybody. And you don't even necessarily have to share it with your best friends. But who is the person that can speak your life where their intention is that you don't experience financial regret? Parenting is another big one. This is some of the best parenting advice that we ever got, and I love this. So you got relationships, you got financial, and you got the parenting one. I think this is so fascinating. I would go around when we were pregnant with Henry. I always say we were pregnant with Henry. Emily was pregnant with Henry, and I was supportive. You know what I mean? Like whatever that was. and what I did is I just went around and started asking people for advice, and I kept it on an Apple Notes sort of thing. I asked everybody that I could find. And I'll never forget, somebody told me, they're like, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to never stop asking for advice from the right people. And I looked, I was like, how do you know if it's the right person? And I love this. They're like, you kind of know. And then they walked away. And I was like, random guy on the subway, thank you so much. You know what I mean? I don't know if you were the right person, but that was great. Like that was his advice. And it was super helpful because for me, what that said was, you know what? I can look at the people that I asked for parenting advice from and actually lean into that. When you have elementary school kids or middle schoolers or high school or college, one of the most difficult seasons is an empty nester, especially when your kid is like 20 to 25. Me and my mom walked through this season where there was a lot of pain and regret around that season of life simply because we weren't letting other people in to speak into it, right? So I think the parenting one. The other one is education. A lot of people have regret around education, how they experience it. A lot of people have regret around health. This is a big one too. And most people don't have regret around health until something health-related comes up. You know what I mean? Like this is kind of a big deal where you're going, who speaks into your life? What friends speak into your life when it comes to your health? And the one that I'm always obviously so fascinated about is spiritual, right? A lot of people have spiritual regret as well. We talk a lot about deconstruction around here, people who walked away from church or walked away from faith. And a lot of times when you hear the stories, this isn't every story, but a lot of times with those stories, what you find at the heart of it is that someone experienced a deeply rooted pain that was very valuable at wherever their religious or church experience was. And that pain led them to stop trusting and led them to a place of isolation that they thought was actually safe, but was actually as detrimental or more detrimental to the relationships they had built that were unhealthy, right? Because isolation doesn't lead you to health. It leads you to more pain, right? And oftentimes what it leads them to is the problem is that the way they approached God and spirituality and their relationship with Jesus on the other side of that was actually deeply connected to more deeper trust issues that they had with people who acted in God's name that made it so painful. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at one small passage of scripture that I think is so fascinating. It's in one of my favorite areas of the Bible. It's called Ecclesiastes. If you've never read through Ecclesiastes, it's so much fun because it's so dark and it's so interesting. It's like everything's good and also everything is meaningless. Like you have all of these sorts of things that are going to go back and forth. And the writer of this is a guy named Solomon. Solomon's background is so fascinating. He writes on wealth. He writes on politics and religion, wisdom and friendship, and so many different facets in the Old Testament. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, I tell people all the time, this is a really interesting place to start because if you look at Ecclesiastes, most people agree with what Solomon's saying in Ecclesiastes. Even if you think about spirituality different or your life different, Ecclesiastes is so fascinating because of his approach to it. And so Ecclesiastes and a lot of writings that Solomon would have had were written to train young people in what was viewed as truth. And he writes specifically in this area of Ecclesiastes about isolation and the danger of it. And here's what Solomon says. He says these words. He says, two are better than one. So here's what we're going to do. I know this is cheesy, but I just want to do it everybody together. Can we just say this together, like all together? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Two are... Oh, it sounds like third grade all over again. Let's say it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Two. Yeah. So I'm going to be honest with you. I don't always believe this, and I don't always live this way. I don't always think that. For me, two is not always better than one. Sometimes one and me and a movie by myself is better than anything else in the world, right? Like the idea of two being better than one is an interesting premise that he starts this on. But at the end of the day, most of us deep down know that this is true. And so what he does is he leverages this idea of two being better than one to move the discussion into a place where he's going to talk about unhealthy isolation. And he also starts to deal with some of the excuses that are made around this. And this is kind of where I want to look at this passage. I want to look at the passage from this perspective. And the question is this: what excuses, right, do you make to mask what is actually unhealthy isolation in your life, right? What excuses do you make to actually mask what unhealthy isolation oftentimes look like? Now, I had this extrovert introvert because I'm an introvert, and that's one of the easiest excuses that I have, right? Well, I'm introverted. I don't enjoy it. I see the world so differently. I don't get energy from it, like whatever that is, like, and so I back away. And those things in some ways are true. And it's also one of the most dangerous parts of my personality, right? What excuses do you make? Right? We do this with our family sometimes. We talk about this a lot. We love to have people over. We love to host people. And we also have 3 kids. And so 2 things are also true. We have 3 kids, and that's extremely hard. And also, we have 3 kids, and people throughout history have also hosted people at their house with 3 kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, both of these are true, and it's hard and painful and difficult to figure out. Sometimes it's an excuse and sometimes it's real. And you have to figure out, what is that in you? So Solomon goes on and he says, 2 are better than 1. And he says, because they actually have a good return for their labor, right? 2 are better than 1 because they have a better return on their labor. What he's saying is this, and this is just simple math: when 2 are moving in a direction together, they actually have a better return than simply one person trying to move forward. And then he shifts the conversation and he makes it personal, and he goes after the heart, which I love. He says this, says, either of them falls down, one can help the other person up. Now, this is easy to read when you're reading in Ecclesiastes and you're quickly reading the Bible and then it just goes. But if you've ever actually fallen down, and you pause and think, it does, you feel that. That hits you in a different spot, right? If either of them falls down, one can help the other one up. Some of you know what it's like to have somebody reach in the hole and come grab you out. I'm a big West Wing fan. Do we have any West Wing fans in the room? Do we have any? Yeah, West Wing. Yeah, it's so fun. So one guy struggling with anxiety, his boss is a lot further along. He's doing counseling. You have this moment. And he does this parable where he says one person walks by and they pray for them. One person walks by, like all this. And then one guy jumps in the hole with him. You probably heard this parable. And the other guy who's in the hole goes, wait, what are you doing down? This isn't helpful. What are you doing? And he goes, oh, don't worry. I jumped down here because I know the way out. You have this big moment of the West Wing. I was like, oh, that's the picture of this. That not being isolated and having people with you, not only to pull you out, but to be in it with you and to move through that. For Solomon, this isn't just about having friends. This is like a protective thing on your life. And he goes on, he says, but pity anyone who falls down and has no one to help them. And you know what this is like too. Many of us know what it's like to have isolated so well and to be so successful at creating distance with people through our proximity, through our humor, through our personality, through simply just not letting people in, that we fall and we look and it's 3 a.m. and we don't even know who to pick up the phone and call. And you know what the hard thing about this is? And this is what nobody loves to think about. The question isn't if you're going to fall down. The question is when, right? Your life may not fall apart, but you will experience the depths of pain because you're a human and because you're living with other humans, right? And there's something about you, and this is the why, and it was the prudent or the wise see danger far in advance and essentially make their plans ahead of that. And this is what wise people do. Wise people, when it comes to relationships, don't go, oh, you know what, I just need more friends. Wise people go, who do I need in my life? And how do I lean into that? Because it's not if something's gonna happen or if I'm gonna fall, but when I fall, who is with me? I put it in my notes, I said it this way. Isolation doesn't prepare you for the moments when your community is needed. Isolation doesn't do that. The practice of continually pulling yourself away from relationships that can make you better It doesn't do that. And when it falls hard. And then he goes on, he says this. He says, also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Which sounds like a really cheesy, creepy Christian pickup line, but this is what he's saying, right? here's what he's saying. He's saying, when your life depends on it, right? The context around this is so fascinating. It's not just like, oh, what's up? I mean, it's not that. It's, if you're trying to survive and need to stay warm, you need someone else because your own body can't keep you warm enough. That when it comes down to the depths of your survival and you moving through the world, you can't do certain things by yourself. You can't flourish in the world as someone who prioritizes isolation over building the right kinds of relationships. So here's the honest question. This is what I want you to kind of think through in regards to what Solomon says. And if a name doesn't pop up, this matters. The question is this: who is actually present when you fall or you have fallen? Not all your friends, not who you call just to hang out with, not who comes over for poker night, not who's just on your text where it's just crazy, stupid memes all the time, right? Not whoever you're beating in Wordle. I don't even know what that is. I was trying to be relevant. Did that work? Yeah, I should do that. Like, not any of those things. Who do you call that would pick up the phone and answer? And if the answer is my mom, that's good. And you need more. The question is this: who in your life can ask the questions and not take "I'm fine" as an answer? Or even more specifically, ready? Who knows you well enough to know when your humor is distancing, and who knows you well enough to know when you're simply just avoiding a problem that you should be leaning into? Who presses and then presses again? Who sits with you at coffee and knows that you're not okay and cares enough to speak up? All right, here's the harder one. You ready? This is really tough. Who is willing to sacrifice the friendship on behalf of the friendship by speaking bluntly to you? And then who are you that friend to? And I'm not talking about your spouse. Your spouse has to be, right? You got to be, right? Your mom has to be. Your family has to be. But who? Who in your life is a friend that's like that? And so he talks about like the physical needs. And he talks about the desperation sorts of moments of this. And he says this. He says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And the imagery here isn't just like a fight. It's a defense of themselves when things are overpowering them in the world. And then he continues on. He moves on with this illustration. He says this. He says, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, I've never made a rope. I've never needed to do that. That's not something I do. I don't go camping a lot and need a rope, and I don't know what else you need ropes for. I don't know that. But I did study it because I'm a dork. And so here's the thing. You know this about the way that ropes work. If you have one sort of cord, it's as strong as the cord is going to be. You do 2 of them, and you know this just makes sense. 2 of them are stronger. But 3 of them, don't miss it, in terms of strength, grow 10 to 12 times as strong when you simply add the 3rd strand to whatever the braid is. Isn't that fascinating? It's like the 3rd one has power in the work. There's just 1 or 2 or 3. Now, I braided my daughter's hair yesterday for the very first time while thinking about this talk because, that's what preachers do. And so I was braiding her hair. I was kind of thinking about this, and I thought this was so funny. I did it really poorly every time. But by the time I got to the 3rd one, I started thinking about, by the time you get to the 3rd one, I think this is what you do. If not, I now know what she screamed. But I pull it a little bit after it got stronger. I pulled it a little bit. And to tighten it, do you do that? No. Okay. I'm just kidding. So I did. And she wasn't super pleased with that. And so I pulled it. I ended up calling in reinforcements, being Emily, to help me figure this out. But by the time I got to it, though, and I pulled it tight, I was like, this is like a thing. You know what I mean? I used to be really curious when you see girls running and the braids are flapping. This is how my brain goes. How does that stay in place? You ever how does that work? Yes, this is what I think about. And I did it yesterday with Eleanor, and I was like, if I would have just done 2, it would have just been a weird sort of spiral. There's something about the third part of that braid and pulling it, but don't do that. But the tightness and the strength of it is different, right? Now, I know that's cheesy, and it's also extremely true. There's something about not just one, but at least 2 people who can see from different kinds of perspectives in your life and speak into it. I'll put it in my notes because I want you to remember this. I said this: isolation doesn't prepare you for the moments where community is needed. You know this is true. The second part about this that I want you to kind of internalize, especially over the next week, is this: that every person, every one of us needs someone, but there's also someone who needs you to be this person. Everyone needs someone, but there's someone who needs you. And come on, this is a really honest truth, especially in the world that we live in, and Western culture where digital is so high and social media is this, and you can feel like people are affirming you and friends all the time. You can feel like you have a lot of friends and actually both not be this kind of friend and be severely lacking in having friends as well. And so I kind of want you just to be honest with yourself about this. Nobody can solve this for you because you can fake this so well. But who are the people that you are this friend for? And who are the people that you're this friend for that you shouldn't be this friend for anymore because of how it's affecting you? And who are the people in your life that you're close to and that are this in your life? And when was the last time you said thank you to those people and invited them further into the relationship, right? One of the people that I used to meet with was a CEO of a really large company in Atlanta. I remember asking him about this, and he said this. I thought this was so helpful, and I've tried to do this throughout my life. Like, you got to identify what the most important areas of your life are, like family, right? Like finances are a big deal. Like, for us, for what I do, like leadership's a big deal, like all these things. And he said this. He goes, you need to find friends who excel in those areas, and you need to, he says, you have to invite them. You invite them in to speak into the most important areas of your life. And he goes, you have to recognize that not every friend should speak into every area of your life. You know this. You have friends that should get nowhere near giving you financial advice. They should get them as far away from giving you financial advice as possible. You have friends that should never coach you on your marriage, ever, ever. You have friends that have done parenting so well, but you're afraid to talk to them about how to be a great parent for whatever pride reason you've given yourself. But you need to stop that. You need to invite them in. Come on, this is a really hard one. Some of you need to invite people into your life that you'll never be able to fully contribute to. You'll want to, and you will. But you need these mentor relationships where you can't give them something that they don't already have or need. But you need to invite them into your life. And then some of you ready? Come on. Some of you, and this isn't in every area of life, but some of you need to be mentors to other people and just freely give parts of your life away. And freely give, this is the hardest part for both sides of this, freely give the story of your brokenness away too. Some of you are where you are right now in life because you've experienced pain and you've navigated it well because other people helped you navigate it well. And one of the greatest gifts that you can ever give is the power of your story for somebody else. So here's what I want you to imagine just for a second. I want you to imagine this. And it's short, but hopefully it brings some of this out. Imagine what would have happened if your parents would have embraced this fully. Imagine what your parents would have avoided in terms of regret and pain in their life and in your life. They simply invited other people who are wise to be a part of it. It's always a fun and really easy one to answer. Imagine what would happen if your friends, what would they have avoided if they would have listened to you and invited your advice in? What would that have been? This is a tough one, and the older your kids are, the more difficult this can be. But imagine what your kids would have avoided. Don't miss this. They would have chosen their friends even better in middle school or high school or college or beyond. Some of you, you know what it's like to pray for your kid every day, not for the regret that they're experiencing, but for the people that surround them. And I'll tell you this, if you're praying that for your kid right now, just don't stop praying that prayer. But you know, like what that feels, you feel the weight of that. We prayed for our son this past week. He came home, and the whole first part of the year, there was a kid who was making we talk about decision making all the time in our home. Bad decision, bad decision. He's like, oh, he's my best friend. And like red flags and sirens and ding, 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 ding went off. And like, how do we, like we had like a freak out moment where you're just like, wow, you know? You ever said that to your kid? Like, wow, like, how do we help you see? And he's in kindergarten. How do you make decisions when it comes to this really well? And then for you, it's helpful to evaluate what would you have avoided if you simply had the right people who are around you in the most critical junctures of your life. Right. So this is what we said. Everyone needs someone. There's someone who needs you. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do this week. And this is probably, for some of you, feels like, oh, it just kind of feels like grunt work or whatever that is. But I want you to think about your relationships in terms of 3 specific circles. Some of you have done versions of this exercise before, but let's just call them your Facebook friends, because that's the easiest. That's how most of us have. We're most famous with the 300 or 400 people or however many people follow you on Facebook. There's that group of people, right? These are acquaintances. You might see them in the supermarket and say, hey, maybe not. Some of you would avoid those people in the supermarket. We'll talk about that later. You have that largest circle of people that you know of but don't know well. And you have the second tier of people who you would say are friends that you have spent time with and hung out with and will continue to spend time with and hang out with. Let's say that group of people is like maybe 30 to 50 people, whatever that is, right? But I want you to evaluate your core. And let's assume your spouse is in your core. If you're married, let's assume the people that you're closest to are there. But I want you to think about this in terms of people who aren't required to love you. The people that aren't required to love you, family, spouse, all that stuff. Who's in that inner circle? And who would say that you're in that inner circle? And I want you to write it down. And I want you to look at it. And I want you to evaluate this. You ready? I want you to evaluate if they should be there. And I want you to evaluate the kind of person that should be there as well. Who are the people that you need in your inner circle of your life that need to be there? And then I'm going to give you probably the most difficult action step of the whole thing, especially for all of us introverts like me in the room. When you figure out who needs to be there, or you figure out who is there, right? The people that should be there and that are already there, I want you to say thank you to them sometime this week. And more than just yo, what's up, bro? 2 taps, walk away. More than that. Like a thank you for, and then be specific about that thing. If somebody's in that group and they shouldn't be there, here's the harder part. I'm going to ask you to make a plan on how you're going to distance that relationship and move them to the next circle out so that you can protect yourself well. And then if you're going, I look at that inner circle and there's really nobody there, right? Likely there's somebody around you that should be there or that could be there that might be a mentor. Here's what I want you to do. This takes courage on your part. I want you to write down what it is that you need. And if there's a mentor or somebody that's not just a friend, but like somebody that you can reach out to or a friend that you have, I want you to text them this week. It's the most practical thing. I want you to text them this week and just have coffee. Now, I don't want you to sit at that coffee and go, can we be friends? Like, I don't want you to do that. Like, it's not that, but don't be that guy. You know, do that. But I want you to ask them their story and get to know them. And share something at least one step further than you typically would to progress the relationship to something else. I'm going to ask you to do that. And if it's a mentor, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to take that person out and thank them for whatever it is that you want to be mentored by them with. And then I'm going to ask you to say, hey, here's my questions. Can I just ask you my questions? And then come prepared. Come prepared with the questions. Don't waste their time. Sit there over coffee and ask their questions and then shut up and listen. And it's awesome when they're 75, 80 years old. These are some of the best people you can do that with. All right. Super simple, but I want you to do that. Here's what we're going to do to wrap up our time together. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. And we're going to wrap up our time today with a song. But here's what I want you to do. As we've talked about this unearths something for many of us, which I totally get. For some of you, you feel like, oh yeah, I'm kind of already there, or maybe I need to make some tweaks, or some of you need to think about your life in those categories that we talked about and move in that way. But here's what I want to ask you to do, though. And this is a really simple prayer that we started praying when I was a kid. I still pray this prayer consistently, and now we pray it with our kids. And so I'm gonna pray this prayer with you, and I'm gonna ask you to kind of pray this prayer continually as well. And here's the prayer. The prayer is simple. It just says, God, give me the wisdom to see who I need to be close to. And then God, give me the courage to make wise decisions about those relationships. It's that simple. So I'm gonna ask you to stand up. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna pray that simple sort of prayer over you. And then you get to go do the hard work this week of, relationshiping, which will be great. And then we'll move from there. So let me do this. Let me pray for us. We're going to wrap up with a song called Make Room. Kind of sing that out as a prayer, especially as we think about this relationship thing. But let's pray this together. Father, God, thank you for all the people that are here. God, thank you for the work that you're doing in us. Thank you for the ways that you're moving in our hearts and our lives as we think about where we're going over the next 5 years. And God, this one sort of talk and set of decisions probably is the most important thing that we're going to say this entire series about this, because the people that we're around really do determine our direction and where we're headed. And so, Father, right now, I pray this over every single person here. I pray that you would give every single person here just the right people in their lives, wisdom on how to make those decisions. And God, that you would give them wisdom about where people need to be in their lives and how it works. I pray that every person in this room is surrounded by people that are going to move them in the direction that they need to go. And I pray that every single person in this room, God, that it can be said about us, that we're those types of friends and relationships for other people. God, it's in Jesus' name we pray.